The fifth principle that you talk about is the importance of limited and representative government. And I guess it's the assumption that government power and legitimacy, I think John Locke talked about this an awful lot, is legitimacy of a government comes from the people and not from the state. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, there are two things. Firstly, yes, that's right, that the government basically comes into being because we as individuals, a collection of individuals, a group of individuals, we set up a government in order that it has a monopoly of coercion. It can protect us against bad guys
Mm.
from home or abroad. So that's why we set it up. Why it should be representative government is because, as we have learnt over the millennia, and it was obvious to the Romans and it was obvious to the American founding fathers, that if you have every law decided by the whole of the population, well, it's a very cumbersome system for a start. Particularly today, it would be almost impossible to do that. But secondly, you get some really weird decisions being made. And what you do, therefore, is that you elect people to take those decisions on your behalf. Most people have much better things to do than to bone up on the details of, I don't know, farm production or raising pigs or whatever. And that's why we get politicians to do that work for us, so that they become expert on different issues, and they can make a more rational judgment than we
Mm-hmm.
can on those issues. So we empower them to do that on our behalf, and that's why you have representative government. But the representatives do actually have to represent you. They don't have to
Yeah.
follow exactly what you think, but they have to use their judgment in saying, well, I think this would benefit my electors
Mm-hmm.
rather than something else. So that's why it has to be government, but representative government.
No, I think you're onto something. We almost need to have legislation that forbids governments from borrowing money in the long term. And yeah, because they just cannot resist as elected officials and state officials to using more and more money to build a bigger state and to, frankly, try to appease all kinds of special interest groups. So I think you're onto something. The sixth principle that you talked about is the importance of the rule of law. Is that what John Adams meant? We are a nation of laws and not of men?
That's exactly right. Yes, between being ruled by laws and being ruled by men or indeed women, and so that's the key difference there. And part of the thinking of the rule of law is that the people who make the laws have to be have to respect those laws themselves. They can't be above the laws. When Mrs. Thatcher came to office in the UK, we had what was called Crown immunity, which meant that anything like a hospital, say, or a school that was run by the government didn't have to follow the same standards as a private
No kidding.
institution. And you think, well, that's absolutely lunatic. If a
Hmm.
private hospital has to scrub its floors, once a day, well, why shouldn't they? Why should the government not have the same obligation? That's just a total discrimination. So that's part of it, that nobody is above the law, and that's the key part really of the rule of law.
Wow, that sounds good. So let's talk about the seventh principle, and that's about the importance of recognizing spontaneous order. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's quite simple that people can generally get along with each other just fine, and they do that in a way which actually produces a well functioning society. Think about things like think about animal societies like bees or termites or whatever, very complicated societies. But
Hmm.
somehow it just evolves. It just occurs. It's not that there's some chief bee that's giving everybody orders as to how they should act and so on. It's a spontaneous interaction between all of the different participants, which is spontaneous. It's not an order that arises through somebody giving out commands. That's the point. It's
Hmm.
order, but it's not a commanded order.
Hmm.
So look at whether you really have to intervene in a system or not. Whether you're actually improving it by intervening, and
Hmm.
are you making the market better by
Hmm.
having, I don't know, wage and price controls, say. Probably not, because that market has evolved over the millennia,
Hmm.
and it's probably got a great deal more, if you like, wisdom in it than
Hmm.
there is in your head.
Exactly. But I think it's a very exciting point of wisdom. It's a principle that can help guide better public policy. At Frontier, we often refer to things like subsidiarity, the whole notion that if you're going to make a public policy, try to move it as close to the individual, the local level, as possible. Don't have some faraway central government try to control things because they don't know what's really going on in your life. So try to move things as close to the person as possible and empower them to live their lives the best they can for their family and for themselves. So I think this is really quite an exciting principle. The eighth principle, as you've alluded to, is about property, trade, and markets. Um, can you tell us more about why that's such an important principle?
Hmm. It's I think it's a sort of matter of fact. I mean, it's one of these things that you look at successful societies, and they're basically all capitalist societies where there is clear ownership. And the thing is that in a market, you see what happens is people trade goods. They swap one thing for another. We get confused because people swap goods for money and money for goods and so on. But actually, what they're doing is really swapping one good against another.
Hmm.
I need a haircut, and tomorrow I'm going into the barber, and I'm going to get a haircut, and I shall give the barber some money, and the barber will probably use that to buy lunch. So I'm really swapping a haircut for a lunch. And when we do that, the barber and I are both better off. The barber might have got the
Hmm.
money, but I want the haircut more than the money, and he wants the money more than the haircut. So we're both actually better off. Again, this goes right back to Adam Smith in the Wealth of Nations, 1776,
Hmm.
where he says that's the key thing about trade. It generates value. So
Hmm.
markets do that. They create value. They give us satisfaction that wasn't there before, and so you should allow them to get on and do that. And if people cannot have ownership over their own property and they can't decide the goods that they own, how they can use them, how they can exchange them, how they can sell them, just get rid of them, um, then that system doesn't work. So, good, clear property rights are absolutely essential to making markets work, and markets are absolutely essential to increasing human value.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're getting in the home stretch here. We're on principle number nine, which is civil society. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, all of those um, groups and collaborations between individuals, churches and clubs and associations and religions and all of these groups have very positive things to deliver to society. It doesn't all have to be the government.
Hmm.
This was an obsession of the Soviets, of course. You had to get rid of religion because it was something contrary to the government. The
Hmm.
government wanted people to do one thing, and religion was driving them to do something else. So what's the solution to that? Well, let's get rid of religion. We'll close down the churches and so on and so on, and make it very difficult to practice your religion. these groups are extremely important because, as you say, it's a case of taking responsibility for life down to the lowest possible level. You take it down to the level of individuals, and you take it down to the level of groups of individuals.
I think that's an incredible tradition that we don't want to lose. And then finally, you talked eloquently in your book, Eamon, about the importance of common values in our society. What do you mean by that?
Well, I had to make it up to 10, of course, so maybe that's not a very good one. But uh, what I mean is that I think there are some fundamental values that we need to agree on. I was just having this conversation this morning where I was pointing out that my wife and I, if we'd met on social dating, we wouldn't have been compatible at all because our interests and likes are entirely different. She's sports mad and she's theatre mad, and I hate these things, for example. But at the same time, we've been together for nearly 40 years because we agree on some fundamental values about
Hmm.
life and the importance of life and the importance of family and the importance of honesty and right and wrong. So these, I think, fundamental values, these liberal values, are absolutely essential, and we really need to rediscover and teach these values. I think we value today so many trivial things, or we're told to value so many trivial things that aren't really
Hmm.
fundamental values, and then you lose sight of what is really fundamental. And I
Indeed.
think that is absolutely essential.
I like your eloquent summation of the importance of common values, Eamon, and it strikes me that your emphasis that we should renew ourselves in these principles and those values in our society by teaching the next generation is so critical. And yet it seems like our education systems are just doing the opposite, teaching a different set of values. So I think that gives us some clues in terms of the actions by which we can take. And one of the things that was really quite a great insight in your book is that these principles have been really foundational for pulling billions of people out of poverty the last 200 years and punting them into the world of prosperity. So these are things that we can't take for granted. These are very important principles. Are you concerned that these principles are in jeopardy now?
Well, in a sense, yes, because I think those of us in the woke West, as I say, we're so fortunate to have all of the institutions of a free society that we forget their value, and uh, and then we start to dismantle them. On the other hand, I look at the world and it's getting better, and it's
Mm.
getting better largely because of market principles, because of liberal principles, because the people who are really made better off are the poorest. And to me, that's what it's all about. It ain't about equality or whatever it is. It's about making the poorest people better off.
Well, that's a brilliant summation, Dr. Eamonn Butler, the president of the Adam Smith Institute in London. We're so grateful that you could join us for this conversation about 10 key principles of classical liberalism and how we can't take those for granted in 2024.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.